1,000 mercenaries filled the exchange hall, armed, augmented, armored in metal worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. And at the very bottom of every listing, below every price, below every name worth hiring, one man sat alone, old coat, no armor, no implants, no weapon anyone would bother stealing. A number floating above his head in pale amber light. 73 credits a day, the cheapest bodyguard in the galaxy. He looked like nobody, moved like nobody, charged what nobody else would accept. But somewhere across the room, a woman with 81 credits to her name was walking toward him. A dead father's secret in her pocket, an empire trying to erase her, and no idea that the man she was about to buy for less than the price of dinner had once held a gate against an army. While 18,000 civilians walked to safety behind him, she sat down, and the galaxy shifted. Hold fire. That's him. It can't be. It is. Lower your weapons. Now. The cheapest bodyguard in the galaxy looked like a man who had already survived everything worth being afraid of. Lyra Aevyn noticed that before she noticed his price. 73 credits a day. The number hovered above his head in pale amber light. Embarrassingly small, almost offensive, like a clearance tag someone forgot to remove from a coat nobody wanted. Around him, professional guards advertised themselves like weapons. A four-armed carrion wore polished combat armor rated against military plasma. 900 credits. A cybernetically enhanced Torvex displayed threat response statistics beside his scarred face. 1,200. One towering reptilian mercenary had apparently killed something called a Draxian tunnel beast with his bare hands. 1,400. Then there was him. Human, age 31, security rating C, combat augmentations, none registered, contract rate, 73 credits per day. He sat beneath his holographic listing in an old charcoal coat, one ankle resting over the opposite knee. No powered armor, no visible implants, no enormous weapon strapped across his back, just short dark brown hair, a clean-shaven jaw, blue-gray eyes, and the calm expression of a man waiting for a train that was slightly late. His name was Cade Morrow, and Lyra Aevyn was about to buy him. Not because she wanted to, not because she believed a human in a second-hand coat could protect her from whatever was coming, because she had 81 credits, and he cost 73. And math, unlike people, didn't lie. 6 days ago, Lyra Aevyn had been someone, not just someone, a Vaori noble, daughter of Aldrin Aevyn, heir apparent to a commercial empire spanning 11 systems. She ate breakfast on porcelain that cost more than most families earned in a year. She traveled with 4 bodyguards, 2 diplomatic aides, and a personal assistant named Olin Drask, who scheduled her life down to the minute and somehow always had her favorite tea ready before she asked. 6 days ago, she had power. 5 days ago, her father died. 3 artificial hearts, the best medical engineering in the galaxy. And somehow, cardiac failure. The doctors called it unprecedented. Her uncle Sorath called it tragic. The funeral was quick. Too quick. Like someone wanted the questions buried before anyone thought to ask them. 4 days ago, Lyra Aevyn assumed temporary control of the family trade fleet. Temporary. He said the word like it tasted sweet. 3 days ago, Lyra found something wrong. Numbers that didn't add up. Shipping manifests that listed destinations that didn't exist. Cargo weights that changed between departure and arrival. She told Olin, trusted Olin. Olin said he'd look into it. 2 days ago, her family accounts were frozen, her transport clearance revoked, her security detail recalled, and Olin stopped answering messages. 1 day ago, someone tried to enter her apartment at 3:12 station time. The lock held, barely. Now she stood in a security exchange with 81 credits and a data chip pressed against her heart. She was surrounded by the most dangerous beings money could buy, and felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Her luminous facial markings dimmed beneath her pale blue skin. She could feel them fading. The soft light that traced her cheekbones, her temples, the bridge of her nose. Every Vaori carried these markings. They were beautiful, they were cultural, and they were treacherous, because they broadcast emotion whether you wanted them to or not. Right now, they were telling every trained observer in this room that Lyra Aevyn was afraid. And in a room full of predators, fear was an invitation. Don't. Lyra turned. The broker beside her was staring at Cade Morrow's listing with the expression of someone examining expired food. He's cheap for a reason. What reason? The broker clicked his tongue. Human. Lyra waited. That is a species, not a reason. Death world species. Difficult temperament. Poor obedience. Unpredictable. Across the hall. Cade Morrow glanced toward them, briefly, like a man checking the weather. The broker immediately lowered his voice. And that one has no meaningful service history. Lyra looked at the profile again. Employment records fragmented. Previous contracts unavailable. Military service. None listed. Client reviews. 3. 2 simply read. Alive. He finished his job. Lyra's icy blue eyes narrowed. That seems meaningful. Lady Aevyn, I strongly recommend I cannot afford what you strongly recommend. The broker fell silent. Lyra hated that silence, because 3 days ago, everyone on Helion Station had called her Lady Aevyn. Everyone had bowed. Everyone had smiled. Now the title sounded like an obituary being drafted early, and she had 81 credits, and one choice. She crossed the exchange floor. Cade Morrow didn't look at her as she approached. He was watching the reflection in a polished metal pillar behind her. She noticed that, filed it away, didn't understand it yet. She stopped in front of him. Mr. Morrow, depends who's asking. His voice was quiet, earth accent, unhurried, like a man who had stopped rushing a long time ago and never started again. Lyra Aevyn, I know. That bothered her. How everyone in this room knew who you were before you walked in. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were colder than she expected. Not cruel, that wasn't the word. Observant. Like something behind them was always measuring, always counting exits. They moved once, over her academy-cut traveling coat, the missing family escort insignia, the small luggage case in her hand, the faint outline of something rectangular in her inner pocket. Then to her wrist. You're broke. Lyra's markings flashed. I am experiencing temporary restrictions on liquidity. That's rich person language for broke. She almost walked away. Almost. Because 81 credits. Because someone at her door at 3 in the morning. Because her father was dead, and the man who might have killed him was currently running her family's entire trade fleet. So instead of walking away, she said, I require protection. Cade looked past her again. That reflection thing. She'd have to ask about that. How long 3 days? Where are you going, Antara Station? Something shifted in his posture. Not much. But she caught it. Like hearing a door click shut 2 rooms away. Why, that is private. Then hire someone decorative. Lyra stared at him. You are being interviewed. No. Cade leaned forward. Elbows on knees. That old coat bunching around shoulders that were broader than she'd estimated. You're deciding whether to spend 73 credits. I'm deciding whether 73 credits is enough to get shot at, for the first time that day. Lyra nearly smiled. Nearly. Why are you so inexpensive? Something changed behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. A door opening, then slamming. I don't need much. That isn't an answer. It's the one you get for free. Lyra should have hated him. She had grown up around men who spoke in diplomatic layers, men who calibrated every sentence, men who would never dream of calling a Vyari noblewoman broke to her face. Cade Morrow had done it twice. And yet, she touched her wrist terminal. A holographic contract opened between them. Pale green light in the crowded exchange. Cade Morrow. Personal Security Service. 73 credits per day. She authorized payment. 73 credits left her account. 8 remained. Enough for 2 meals, maybe 3 if she ate like a student instead of a noble. The display turned green. Contract active. Such small words for such a large bet. Lyra had just wagered her safety, her mission, possibly her life, on a man she'd spoken to for less than 3 minutes. Her father would have called it reckless. Her father was dead. and the men who killed him charged a lot more than 73 credits. Cade stood. Lyra had expected him to be average size for a human. He wasn't enormous, but standing changed him. Broad shoulders filled the old coat differently. His posture stayed loose, relaxed. Yet something about the way his weight settled made Lyra suddenly aware of every exit around them, which was strange, because she hadn't been aware of exits before. He picked up a small travel bag. That was all. That is all your equipment, no. Where is the rest? Cade opened his coat just enough to reveal an old compact sidearm in a worn holster. Lyra stared. That weapon is obsolete. So am I. A booming laugh came from behind them, the kind of laugh designed to make everyone in earshot stop and look. And they did. The reptilian mercenary from the premium listing stood with two companions. Tall, all three of them. Armored, teeth visible. The kind of creatures who had never once in their lives been told they were too small, too weak, too cheap. Aevyn bought the human. His voice carried across the exchange floor. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Every guard, every broker, every client who was currently negotiating protection for their life looked over to watch a Vyari noblewoman stand beside the cheapest listing in the building. For 73 credits, another one said. Laughter, not from 2, from 20. The sound filling the exchange like something spilling, spreading, staining. Cade didn't react, didn't tense, didn't even blink. The reptilian stepped closer. No armor, no implants. His voice dropped lower, louder. A performance. Little mammal, what exactly are you protecting her with? Cade looked at him, then at the weapon on his hip, then at the ceiling. Lyra expected an insult, a comeback, something sharp. Cade simply said, "Your safety's off." The mercenary looked down. Instinct, pure instinct. It wasn't off. But by the time he looked back up, Cade was already walking away. Lyra hurried after him. That was childish. Worked. You embarrassed him. He'll recover. She studied his profile as they walked. No smile, no satisfaction, nothing. Like embarrassing a 7-foot reptilian mercenary was barely worth remembering. Who are you? She thought it. Didn't say it. Not yet. But the question had already started growing. They entered Helion's Central Transit Concourse, and everything changed. Not the station. The station was the same. Thousands of travelers flowing beneath enormous holographic advertisements. Cargo drones humming overhead. The air tasting faintly of ozone and engine coolant. Cade changed, not visibly. The casual man from the exchange didn't suddenly become someone else, but the energy around him shifted, hardened, like water freezing so slowly you didn't notice until you tried to move through it. His eyes moved without appearing to move. Window, balcony, reflection, exit, hands, distances. Lyra felt a cold sensation beneath her ribs. You've done this before. Cade ignored the statement. He stopped beside a darkened storefront, casually, like a man looking at merchandise. Who knows you're here? My staff, the broker, station administration. Family, yes. Enemies, I don't have enemies. Have. Cade finally looked directly at her. Blue-gray eyes. Patient. The way someone looks at a child who insists monsters aren't real while standing in a very dark room. Someone froze 17 million credits, recalled your security, and visited your apartment after midnight. Lyra said nothing. Cade turned toward the storefront glass. In its reflection, 3 figures had stopped 30 meters behind them. One pretended to study a transit schedule. Another touched something beneath his coat. The third was watching Lyra. Lyra's heartbeat changed rhythm. Cade's expression remained perfectly calm. Congratulations. On what? He adjusted the cuff of his old coat. You have enemies. The first rule of being followed, Cade said quietly, is never let them know when you notice. Lyra kept walking. Every instinct told her to turn around. Her luminous markings had already betrayed her anxiety, glowing faintly across her pale blue cheeks. A biological response she couldn't fully control. How many? 3? You're certain for now. Lyra's eyes widened. You just said 3. One joined near the elevator. You didn't look. Didn't need to. He nodded toward another storefront. Polished black window. Lyra saw herself first. Silver white hair flowing over her shoulders. Expensive traveling coat. Expression tighter than she wanted it to be. Then Cade, calm, hands in pockets. Then the crowd. 3 figures moving together despite pretending otherwise. And the fourth, 20 meters back. Tall, gray coat. One hand that never left his pocket. Lyra's stomach tightened. What do we do? Keep walking. That is your plan. Part of it. For 73 credits. I suppose I shouldn't expect details. Cade almost smiled. Now you're... They took an elevator to level 42. Lyra frowned. Antara dock connections are on level 9, I know. Then why the doors opened? Cade stepped out into a commercial district. Restaurants, traders, floating advertisement drones selling things nobody needed. He walked 30 meters, then entered another elevator. Level 26. Lyra pressed the button, stared at him. Are we lost, Gnome? Because this feels remarkably like being lost. The doors opened. They crossed a medical plaza. Took a moving walkway 200 meters. Lyra's heels clicking against the surface. Cade's boots silent. How were his boots silent? She was a noble. She'd been trained to walk quietly in 17 different social contexts. And this man in a second-hand coat moved like gravity owed him a favor. Then a freight elevator, going down. Lyra's mind rearranged the pattern. Level 42, 26, medical plaza, freight corridor. Never the same direction twice. Never the expected floor. Never a straight line between where they were and where they should be. She finally understood. You're testing them. Cade glanced at her. Something warm flickered across his face. Brief, like a match struck in the rain. Good. The freight elevator had mirrored walls. In the reflection. Lyra watched the doors close, just before they sealed. The gray-coated figure appeared at the far end of the corridor, still following. Her markings brightened. Cade saw them. Can you control that my markings, they advertise your emotional state? Lyra looked offended. They are part of my biology. So is sweating. Humans still invented deodorant. She stared at him. Was that intended to be reassuring? No. But here was the thing Lyra noticed. Between the elevators, between the walkways, between the freight corridors and the medical plazas. Cade wasn't just testing their pursuers. He was watching her. Not protectively. Not yet. He was evaluating. The way she moved through crowds. The way she held her luggage. The way she automatically adjusted her route when a corridor looked wrong. And Lyra realized. He was deciding whether she was an asset or a liability. She decided to show him. Because in her inner coat pocket, pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat, was a data chip. Her father had left it. Hidden inside a ceramic box that looked decorative. Placed on her desk the morning before he died. No note, no message, just the chip. She had tried to access it. Encrypted. Veraclass. Which meant she needed family network systems to decode it. Which meant Antara Station. Which meant getting there alive. Cade didn't know about the chip yet. And Lyra hadn't decided whether to tell him. Because trust was a luxury. And she currently couldn't afford luxuries. Only 73 credit bodyguards. Level 14. The underbelly of Helion Station. Lower market. Some people called it the black market, which wasn't entirely fair. Some of the business here was perfectly legal. Just ugly. And preferred to operate where station security didn't visit often. Cade stopped at the entrance. Looked at Lyra. Stay close. I know this level. He raised an eyebrow. Barely. But she caught it. My family owns 30% of Helion's commercial infrastructure. I have been to every level of this station, including the ones that aren't on the public map, for the first time. Cade looked at her differently. Not impressed. Not yet. But recalibrating. Good. They entered. The lower market was a maze of narrow corridors, stacked vendor stalls, holographic price displays flickering in languages from 40 systems. The air smelled of synthetic spice, welding flux, and something Lyra preferred not to identify. She moved through it like she belonged, because in a way, she did. Growing up a Vyari noble meant learning the legitimate economy, but it also meant understanding the shadow one. Her father had insisted. Know where the money goes when it doesn't want to be found, he'd said once. That's where the truth usually hides. She missed him so much her chest ached, but she kept moving. Cade followed, watching. He didn't ask where she was going, didn't suggest routes, didn't hover behind her like the bodyguards she'd grown up with. Those men had made her feel like luggage. Expensive luggage, but luggage. Cade walked beside her, not behind. She noticed that. Lyra navigated through the crowd, past a stall selling decommissioned engine parts, past a data broker advertising memory wipes, past a food vendor whose menu was written in a language Lyra didn't recognize, but whose smell made her stomach remind her she hadn't eaten since yesterday. Later, food was a luxury. Another one. She stopped at a vendor stall run by a small amphibian merchant with enormous golden eyes. His counter was cluttered with transit cards, access badges, communication scramblers, everything technically legal. In the same way that a knife was technically a cooking instrument, 2 transit passes, level 3 clearance, station-issued formatting. The merchant blinked all 4 eyelids. That's expensive. Not if you use last cycle's template. Station security updated their verification 2 days ago, but the scanners on levels 8 through 12 still run old firmware. The merchant stared at her, then at Cade, then back at her. 14 credits, 9, 12, 10, and you never saw us. The merchant produced 2 transit passes. Lyra paid, pocketed them, kept walking. Cade was beside her now, closer than before. Where did you learn that? My father believed education should include inconvenient subjects, such as how to buy things that don't officially exist, and the scanner firmware. Lyra almost smiled. I'm Vyari nobility. We pay attention to infrastructure, because infrastructure is where money moves. Cade said nothing, but Lyra felt something shift between them. Subtle, like a lock turning half a rotation. She wasn't just cargo anymore. He knew it. She knew it. And neither of them said it out loud. The 3 followers from upstairs hadn't appeared on level 14, which should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because Cade had stopped being relaxed. Not obviously. His shoulders stayed the same. His pace didn't change. But his eyes were moving faster, and his right hand had drifted closer to the sidearm beneath his coat. Lyra noticed. What's wrong? Those 3 wanted us to see them. Lyra's mind caught up fast. Pressure. Good. Pressure to push us somewhere. Yes, somewhere like down here. Cade looked at her, and for 1 second, something like approval crossed his face. Then the shot came. No warning, no dramatic announcement. Just a sound like fabric tearing. Except louder. Except hotter. Except the display panel 2 feet from Lyra's head exploded into molten fragments. Blue-white energy. She didn't scream. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But Cade's hand was already on her shoulder, pulling her down, and his voice was in her ear, and it was calm. Calm in a way that made no sense because someone had just tried to burn a hole through her skull. Down, stay low, don't run. The market erupted. Vendors dove behind counters. A cargo drone crashed into a stall. Shoppers scattered in every direction. In the chaos, Lyra saw the shooter. Slender, dark station uniform, standing 40 feet away between 2 vendor stalls, already adjusting aim. This wasn't one of the 3 followers. This was the real threat. The followers were noise, pressure, meant to push Lyra somewhere predictable. Right here, right where someone was waiting. Cade moved, and Lyra understood. In that moment, watching him. What had bothered her about the cheapest guard on Helion Station? Cade Morrow did not move like a man reacting to danger. He moved like a man who remembered it. The second shot came fast. Cade was already somewhere else, shifted left, behind a support column. The bolt hit metal and left a glowing scar. The shooter advanced, confident, professional. Cade kicked a crate into the aisle, not at the shooter, into the narrow gap between 2 stalls, blocking the shooter's lateral escape route. Lyra watched from behind a vendor counter, heart hammering. Because Cade wasn't fighting the shooter. Not yet. He was shaping the space, moving a crate here, knocking a display there, forcing the shooter into a narrower and narrower corridor of options, like a man closing doors in a house, one by one, until there was only one room left. The shooter fired again. Cade ducked beneath it, grabbed the fire suppression handle on the wall. White foam erupted from the ceiling. Visibility vanished. Lyra heard footsteps, a grunt, something hard hitting something harder, then a weapon clattering across the floor. Then silence. A hand emerged from the foam. Lyra nearly screamed. "Me!" Cade caught her arm, steadied her. "You could warn me. I just did." She looked past him, through the thinning foam. The shooter lay on the ground, conscious, but his weapon was 5 feet away, and his right arm was bent at an angle that suggested it wouldn't be reaching for anything soon, but alive. Lyra stared at Cade. He wasn't even breathing hard. She replayed what she'd just seen. Not the violence, the architecture of it. Cade hadn't fought the shooter. He'd rearranged the room, moved a crate here, knocked a display there, triggered a suppression system. Every action building toward a conclusion that seemed inevitable only in hindsight. That wasn't training, that was experience. Deep, old, the kind that gets written into your bones until your body remembers things your mind tries to forget. Lyra looked at the old sidearm still holstered at Cade's hip. He hadn't drawn it, hadn't needed to. A man carrying an obsolete weapon who fought like he didn't need one. Security rating C. Sure. And Helion Station was a small town. The shooter's eyes focused. He looked up at Cade, and everything changed. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly. The man's face went white, which was notable, because his species was typically gray-green. White meant something had drained every drop of composure from his body. His mouth opened. "No." Cade stood over him, expression flat. The shooter tried to crawl backward, one functional arm scraping against the market floor. "You're dead." Lyra looked between them. She'd watched armed mercenaries mock Cade less than an hour ago. Laugh at him, call him little mammal. 73 credits. This was different. This man had just tried to kill them, had nearly succeeded, was clearly trained, clearly professional, and he was terrified. Not of the gun, not of the situation, of the face looking down at him. "What do you mean?" Lyra whispered. Cade didn't answer. The shooter swallowed. His breathing was wrong. Too fast, too shallow. "You're the man from Cathara." Silence. The kind that isn't empty, the kind that's so full it has weight, pressure, the kind that pushes against your chest. Cade's jaw tightened. 1 degree, maybe 2. But Lyra saw it, and she saw something else. His blue-gray eyes, which had been cold, calculating, observant, professional. They changed, not to anger, not to fear, to something older, something that lived deeper than either of those, a wound that had never closed. Then it was gone. "Who hired you?" The shooter laughed. It sounded frightened. "You really don't know." Cade crouched. The man tried to crawl further back. "Stay away from me." "Who hired you?" But the shooter's eyes were still stuck on Cade's face, like a man staring at a ghost, which, Lyra would later learn, was exactly what he thought he was seeing. The shooter reached inside his coat. Lyra gasped. Cade moved, but instead of striking, he caught the man's wrist. A small device fell onto the floor. Not a weapon. A detonator. Cade crushed it beneath his boot. The sound was small, plastic and circuitry cracking under worn leather. But what it meant was enormous. That trained, professional, clearly well-paid assassin had been willing to kill himself rather than be captured, rather than answer who sent him, which meant whoever hired him was more frightening than death. Lyra filed that away, in the growing folder labeled "Things That Should Make Me Run." She wasn't running. Stubborn, her father had called it. Other people used less generous words. The shooter sagged. His breathing was getting worse. Not panic now. Pain. Something internal. Broken during the fight. Cade examined him. Hand steady, clinical, internal injury. Lyra stared. He tried to kill us, I noticed. Leave him. Cade looked at her. And there was no anger in his face, no satisfaction, no righteous fury, just something old, something tired, something that had made this choice before, many times, and would make it again, because that was who he was. No. He opened the emergency medical kit mounted on the wall. Lyra couldn't believe what she was seeing. You're helping him. Cade pressed a clotting patch against the man's side. Gently. The same hands that had broken his arm 30 seconds ago now adjusted the seal with careful precision. He can't hurt you now. He would have killed me. And now he won't. The shooter stared up at Cade from the floor. Fear still there, but mixed with something else. Confusion. And Lyra felt it too. Because the galaxy had taught people what to expect from strength. She had grown up watching it. In noble houses, in trade negotiations, in the careful choreography of power that defined Vaori society. Strength punished, strength dominated. Strength made you remember who was above you and who was below. A stronger family humiliated a weaker one. A victorious commander made defeat memorable. Mercy was interpreted as uncertainty, kindness as weakness. This wasn't that. This was a man who could have killed someone, easily, and chose instead to kneel on a dirty market floor and press a bandage against the wound of the person who tried to end his life. Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Not understanding. Not yet. But the beginning of it. Why Cade wiped his hands on his old coat. Already stained. Already worn. Because strength doesn't need cruelty to prove it exists. The sentence landed in Lyra's chest and stayed there. Like a seed dropped into soil that didn't know it was fertile. She would remember it, later, when it mattered more than she could currently imagine. Cade activated the emergency beacon, stood. Station security will find him. Lyra watched the wounded shooter, then Cade. She had expected violence from a human. The galaxy had taught her that much. Humans came from a death world. High gravity, predator evolution, aggressive biology. Every species in the exchange had looked at Cade and seen the cheapest option. But Lyra was beginning to suspect she was looking at the most expensive thing in the room. She just couldn't read the price tag yet. They moved through the lower market, fast but not running. Cade navigated like he'd memorized the layout. Lyra didn't ask questions, because she was learning a new rule. One Cade hadn't stated yet, but his body language screamed, "Don't ask questions while I'm listening." She watched his back instead, the old charcoal coat, the way his shoulders moved, the way his head tilted slightly left when he was checking reflections, the way his right hand stayed open, not clenched, ready, like a pianist about to play something he'd practiced 10,000 times. "Who are you?" She thought it again, louder this time, and the name Cathara sat in her mind like a locked door she didn't have the key to. Yet, behind them, station security sirens beginning to wail. Someone would find the wounded shooter. Someone would review surveillance footage and see a human in an old coat move through a trained assassin like wind through a broken window. And then, maybe, someone would start asking the same question Lyra was asking. Who is Cade Morrow? They changed routes twice more. Through a recycling facility that smelled like burnt plastic and regret. Through a maintenance corridor so narrow Lyra's shoulders brushed both walls. Through a service hatch that required Lyra to climb down a ladder while holding her luggage case between her teeth. She would have complained. Except Cade went first. And she noticed something she hadn't expected. He checked the ladder rungs before she used them. Tested each one, quietly, without announcing it. Small thing, but small things were starting to add up. They reached a cargo dock on Helion's lower ring. Cade had changed their route 4 times. Lyra had complained about 3. The 4th involved crawling through an inactive ventilation conduit that smelled like hot copper and industrial solvent. She stopped complaining because Cade looked far too entertained by her discomfort, which was irritating, and, somehow, slightly reassuring. Because people who are genuinely afraid don't find things funny. Their transport sat at the far end of the dock, an ugly civilian courier ship. If ships could have expressions. This one looked tired, hull scarred with micro-impacts, paint faded to a color that might once have been blue but had surrendered to gray years ago. One stabilizer fin was slightly bent. The landing gear had been repaired at least twice. Different metals, different eras. The name stenciled on the hull read Wayward. Lyra stared at it. This vessel appears older than you. She's sensitive. You named it. No. Then why are you defending it professional courtesy between obsolete things? The hatch opened with a sound like an old man clearing his throat. Inside was cramped, but clean. Lyra noticed that immediately. The floors were scrubbed, the controls were dust-free, storage compartments were organized. A messy person doesn't keep a ship clean. Someone with discipline does. Someone who respects the tools that keep them alive, even when those tools are old, even when they're ugly, even when everyone else would have traded up years ago. Lyra thought about that, and then thought about Cade's coat, his weapon, his price tag. A pattern was forming. She wasn't sure yet what shape it made, but she could feel its edges. Cade locked the airlock, checked the cockpit, checked it again, checked the cargo hold, checked the emergency hatches, checked the ventilation system. Lyra sat in the co-pilot seat and watched him through the interior camera. Methodical, thorough, every compartment, every seal, every shadow. I wasn't checking for mechanical problems. He was checking for people. Someone who searched a ship this carefully had been surprised before. In a ship, in a place they thought was safe, and had learned the lesson the hard way. When he finished, he disappeared into the engine compartment. Lyra found him tightening a coolant coupling, hands blackened with machine grease, coat sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were lean. Not bulky, but corded with the kind of muscle that comes from use. Not a gym, real work. You're a pilot too. No, you're repairing a spacecraft. That's different. How I don't charge for it. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching him work. His hands moved with the same economy she'd seen in the fight. Nothing wasted, every motion deliberate. You avoid questions remarkably well. Practice. The shooter called you something. Before the name, he called you commander. The tool stopped, just for a heartbeat. Then Cade continued working. But Lyra had her answer, not the full one, the first piece, the corner of a puzzle she didn't yet know the shape of. You heard him. Yes, he called you commander. People call me lots of things. What did they call you on Cathera? Cade tightened the coupling harder than necessary, usually late for briefing. Lyra watched him and understood something suddenly. He wasn't refusing because he distrusted her. He was refusing because the memory hurt. So she changed the question. Where are we going? His shoulders loosened, just slightly. Off Helion. That is not a destination. Right now, it's an achievement. Lyra watched him work, said nothing for a while. The engine compartment was warm. The ship hummed around them like a sleeping animal. Then, without looking up from the coupling, Cade spoke. Your father. How long ago? Lyra blinked. 5 days. A pause. Wrench turning. I'm sorry. 2 words. That was all. But the way he said them, without looking up, without stopping work, without making it a performance, he meant it. And Lyra understood something about Cade Morrow that no client review could have told her. No profile, no rating, no price tag. He knew what it felt like to lose someone, not theoretically, not sympathetically, personally. Thank you. She left the engine compartment because her markings were doing something she didn't want him to see. Brightening. Not from fear this time, from something else. The Wayward launched 20 minutes later. Helion Station fell behind them. A silver wheel against the violet glow of the gas giant below, for the first time since her accounts had been frozen, since her father had died, since someone had tried her door at 3 in the morning. Lyra breathed without feeling watched. Cade sat in the pilot's chair, naturally, hands steady on the controls. You said you weren't a pilot. I said I'm not charging for it. Lyra settled into the co-pilot seat. Where did you learn places with worse landing conditions? She looked at his hands on the controls. No hesitation, no unnecessary movement. Everything about him was like that. economical, as though every gesture had once needed to matter, as though waste had once been the difference between living and not. She wondered what it cost a person to live like that, to trim every motion, every word, every expression down to only what was necessary, to become so efficient at survival that the rest of you, the messy part, the part that laughed too loud or said the wrong thing or cried at music, got packed away into a box labeled unnecessary. And she wondered whether anything was still in that box, or whether it had been empty for a long time. The stars stretched past them, and Lyra reached into her inner pocket. The data chip, small, ceramic-coated, warm from her body heat. She held it in her palm. Cade glanced over, saw it, said nothing. Lyra waited. Most people would have asked, "What's that? What's on it? Is it important?" Cade waited too. And that, more than the fighting, more than the mercy, more than the calm, that was what made Lyra decide. My father left this for me, the morning before he died. Cade looked at the chip, then at her. Encrypted, Veraclass. I need family network systems to decode it, which are on Antara Station. Yes. Which your uncle controls. Yes. Cade looked back at the stars. You're not running away from something. You're running toward it. Lyra closed her fingers around the chip. Both. A long silence, the engines humming beneath them, the stars burning outside. Then Cade said, 73 credits. Yes, you understand that's what I cost. I understand that's what you charge. I'm beginning to suspect those are very different numbers. He looked at her, and for half a second, something cracked in the wall behind his eyes. Something warm, something almost surprised. Then it closed. Get some sleep. I'm not tired. You will be. Lyra looked at the pilot's chair, at the old coat, at the man wearing it. She thought of the shooter on the market floor, the fear in his eyes, not fear of a weapon, fear of a name, Cathara, commander. You're dead. She stood from the co-pilot seat. Cade. Yeah, thank you. He didn't look at her. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the landing. Lyra walked toward the small cabin at the rear of the ship. She set her luggage down, sat on the narrow bunk, held the data chip against her chest. Her father's face surfaced in her mind. The way he used to look at her across the breakfast table, serious but warm, like she was the most important meeting on his calendar. And he always showed up early. He had known something, he had found something, and it had killed him. Lyra's markings dimmed. She didn't cry, not yet. Crying was a luxury too, and she was saving her luxuries for a time when she could afford them. But she made herself a promise. Whatever was on this chip, whatever her father had died trying to protect, she would find it, she would understand it, and she would make sure the man who killed her father understood that Lyra Aevyn was not going to disappear. Not for 17 million credits, not for threats, not for anything. She lay back on the bunk, closed her eyes, and thought about hands. Her father's hands, large, warm, always slightly ink-stained from the old-fashioned writing instruments he loved. Hands that held hers when she was small. Hands that signed documents that moved entire economies. Hands that placed a data chip on her desk the morning before someone stopped his 3 artificial hearts. Cade's hands, different, no ink stains, grease stains, old scars across the knuckles that she'd noticed when he was tightening the coolant coupling. Hands that fought with terrible efficiency. And then, without pausing, without transition, knelt on a dirty floor and pressed a bandage against a wound with the gentleness of someone who understood that broken things deserve care. Those two things shouldn't exist in the same person. Violence and tenderness, living in the same pair of hands. But they did, and Lyra couldn't stop thinking about it. 73 credits, the cheapest bodyguard in the galaxy, who bandaged the man who tried to kill her, who embarrassed a 7-foot mercenary with one sentence, who moved through danger like a man walking through his own house in the dark. Every corner memorized, every door familiar, who checked ladder rungs before she climbed them, without being asked, who sat in a pilot's chair like he'd been born there, and when she showed him the data chip, didn't ask, just waited. because he understood that trust isn't a question you ask. It's a door that opens from the inside. Who are you? Cade Morrow. The answer was out there, somewhere past the stars, somewhere in the word Cathara, somewhere in a wound that crossed a man's face when an assassin whispered a name he'd been running from. And Lyra was going to find it, whether he wanted her to or not. Because Lyra Aevyn was her father's daughter, and her father had taught her one thing above all else. The truth doesn't hide forever. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to look. Somewhere behind her, through two bulkheads in a narrow corridor, Cade Morrow sat in the pilot's chair. Alone. Stars outside the viewport. Quiet engine hum below. And a name he hadn't heard in 8 years echoing through the cockpit like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Cathara. He closed his eyes. 312 names moved through his mind, the way they did every night, the way they had for 8 years, one after another, not faces, not ranks, not serial numbers. Names, first names, the ones their mothers gave them, the ones their friends used, the ones they answered to when someone called across a noisy mess hall. Before the war, before the gate, before 312 became a number on a monument instead of 312 people who trusted him to bring them home. I didn't deserve to forget them, so he didn't. Every night, every name, his private roll call that no ceremony could replace. He opened his eyes, checked the navigation display, checked the sensors, checked the long-range scanner, then looked at the cabin camera. Lyra Aevyn, asleep, silver white hair across the pillow, markings dim, peaceful. She had no idea what she'd hired, and Cade Morrow hoped, with everything left inside him, that she would never need to find out. Lyra woke in darkness, not the comfortable darkness of her apartment on Helion Station, not the heavy darkness of grief. This was the thin darkness of a ship in transit, hum of engines beneath the floor, faint blue glow from the emergency strip along the baseboard, the smell of recycled air and old metal. She lay still for a moment, letting her mind catch up with her body. 5 days since her father died. 1 day since she hired a bodyguard she couldn't afford. 1 day since someone tried to put an energy bolt through her skull, and she was still alive, which, at current odds, felt like an accomplishment. She sat up, rubbed her face. Her markings were dim, resting state, the only time they didn't betray her. Then she heard something. Not a sound exactly, an absence of sound, the specific silence of a person trying very hard not to make noise. Lyra stood, crossed the small cabin, opened the door. Cade Morrow sat on the floor outside, old coat folded beneath him, sidearm across his knees, back against the wall, eyes open, watching the corridor in both directions, like a man standing guard at a gate that only he could see. Lyra stared. "You have a bed." "I know." "Then why are you on my floor?" Better angle on the corridor. She looked both directions. Empty, gray metal, emergency lighting. Not a soul. "You truly believe someone will board us in deep space?" "No." "Then sleep." "I am sleeping." "Your eyes are open." Advanced technique. Lyra looked at him for a long time, at the circles under his eyes that she hadn't noticed in the exchange, at the way his thumb rested on the sidearm's safety. Lightly, automatically. The way a musician's fingers rest on an instrument even when they aren't playing. He wasn't guarding the corridor, he was guarding her door. Because that's where he'd been trained to be. Between danger and the person who mattered. Even when danger wasn't coming. Even when the corridor was empty. Even when the only enemy was the silence inside his own head. She sat down beside him. Cade glanced at her. "What are you doing learning advanced human sleeping techniques?" "You're terrible at it. So are you." Silence settled between them. Not the awkward kind, the other kind. The kind that happens when two people stop performing and just sit in the same small space, breathing the same recycled air, watching the same empty corridor. The engines hummed beneath the deck. Starlight drifted through the small viewport at the end of the hall. Cold light on cold metal. Lyra pulled her knees closer. "My father died 6 days ago." Cade didn't move, didn't look at her, but something in his stillness changed, became more present, more attentive. like a man turning up the volume on a frequency he knew well. He supposedly suffered cardiac failure. Supposedly, he had 3 artificial hearts. Cade looked at her then. That complicates the diagnosis. I thought so. A faint smile touched her mouth, gone quickly, like a bird landing on a wire and immediately leaving again. The day after his funeral, my uncle Sorath assumed control of our trade fleet. 3 days ago, I found discrepancies in the shipping records, numbers that didn't match, cargo that weighed different at arrival than departure, destinations that don't exist on any star chart, and then your money disappeared. Yes. And someone visited your apartment. Yes. Cade leaned his head against the wall. So this isn't about inheritance. No. What did your father find? I don't know. The data chip is encrypted. I need family network systems to decode it, which are on Antara Station, which your uncle controls. Yes. Cade was quiet for a while. Lyra waited. She was learning that his silences weren't empty. They were processing, rearranging, building something in the dark. Then your uncle isn't afraid of what you know. He's afraid of what you'll discover. The sentence landed in Lyra's chest like a key turning, because she hadn't thought of it that way. She'd been thinking about evidence, proof, data. But Cade was right. Sorath hadn't come after her because of what she had. He'd come after her because of what she might find, which meant the truth was worse than she imagined. Lyra looked at Cade. Does anything frighten you? The question came out softer than she intended, more personal. The kind of question you ask at 3 in the morning on a ship floor when the person beside you just helped you see your own situation more clearly than you could alone. Cade's eyes went toward the stars. Yes. What? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, getting used to losing people. The quiet in his voice made her chest tighten. Not sadness exactly. Something beyond it. Something that had already passed through sadness and come out the other side into a territory that didn't have a name. She thought of Cathara, commander. You stayed when everyone else ran. She wanted to ask, wanted to push, wanted to find the door behind his eyes and knock until he opened it. But she didn't, because some doors open only when they're ready. And Lyra Aevyn, for all her stubbornness, was beginning to learn the difference between persistence and patience. The cockpit alarm shattered the silence like a glass hitting a stone floor. Cade was standing before the second tone. Not fast the way panicked people are fast. Fast the way water moves when a dam breaks. Inevitable. Lyra scrambled up, followed him. The cockpit display was screaming. Proximity warning. 1 vessel, then 2, then 4. Small ships, emerging from behind a planetary body. Transponders dark. Lyra gripped the seat. Pirates numb. How can you tell pirates announce themselves? They want you scared. These ships are running silent, which means they don't want us scared. They want us dead. The ships spread into formation, not random, precise, military spacing, equal distance between each vessel, covering escape vectors like fingers closing around a throat. Cade's face went flat, unreadable. The same expression he'd worn in the market before the shooting started. The expression of a man putting everything non-essential into a box and closing the lid. What's the plan? Cade powered down the Wayward's external lights. Lyra stared at the 4 ships on the display. That is not a plan. That is turning off lights. Congratulations. You've summarized Phase 1. There's a Phase 2. Cade pushed the engines to maximum. The Wayward surged forward, directly toward the formation. Lyra's markings went bright. Every single one. Across her cheeks, her temples, her collarbone, glowing like signal flares. You are flying toward them. Yes. 4 armed ships. I can count. Then why? Because they expect us to run, and nobody positions for a target that charges. The cabin shook. Warning lights flashed amber. The Wayward was old. Fast was relative. But Cade wasn't aiming for fast. He was aiming for unexpected. And it worked. The formation hesitated. Half a second. Just enough for the 2 lead ships to adjust their spacing, which opened a gap. Small, temporary, like a door swinging open before the wind pushes it shut. Cade aimed for the gap. 100 kilometers. 70, 40. The interceptors expected him to brake, turn, swerve, run. He didn't. 20. Cade. Trust me, I purchased you yesterday. Bad time to review the contract. 10. Cade cut the engines, fired every maneuvering thruster on the port side. The Wayward rotated, violently. Lyra's stomach tried to continue traveling forward while the rest of her spun sideways. The courier ship slid between two interceptors. Both pilots reacted. One climbed, one dropped. Their firing lanes crossed. Blue plasma erupted. One interceptor took its ally's shot across the engine housing. Shields flared. The formation collapsed into confusion. Cade restarted the engines. The Wayward shot through the opening. Lyra stared at him. You made them shoot each other. I encouraged poor communication. That was military formation flying. Lots of people fly in formations. Not like that. Cade said nothing, but his jaw was tight, and Lyra saw it. The ghost of something old moving behind his eyes. Muscle memory, instinct, the kind of knowledge that doesn't come from training manuals. It comes from war. Behind them, 3 interceptors regrouped. Lyra watched the tactical display, felt the distance closing. They're faster than us. I noticed. They'll catch us. Probably. Do something. Working on it. Ahead, a gas giant filled the viewport. Enormous, bruised purple and amber, swirling atmospheric bands thousands of kilometers wide. Beautiful, terrifying. The kind of thing that reminded you the universe didn't care whether you lived or died. Cade aimed straight for it. Lyra's breath stopped. You cannot be serious. The cloud layer. It'll scramble their sensors. It will also scramble ours. Yes. Then how do we navigate? Cade looked at her. You told me your family owns 30% of Helion's commercial infrastructure. You said you understood shipping routes, trade corridors, infrastructure. Lyra blinked. You need me to navigate. I need you to find us a clean corridor through the upper atmosphere. Density readings, gas composition, anything that tells us where the sensors won't work and the hull won't melt. Lyra stared at him, then at the gas giant growing enormous in the viewport, then at the navigation console. Her father had insisted she learn atmospheric navigation, not because she'd ever pilot a ship, because understanding how cargo moved through dangerous space was understanding how money moved through dangerous politics. She sat at the console, pulled up atmospheric data, gas composition, density gradients, electromagnetic interference zones. Her fingers moved fast, not panicked, focused, the way they moved when she was analyzing trade flows, finding patterns in chaos. There, upper band, 30 degrees north of the equatorial storm, methane concentration creates a sensor shadow, dense enough to hide us, thin enough not to crush the hull. You're sure 90%, and the other 10 we melt. Cade almost smiled. Good enough. The Wayward plunged into the atmosphere. Inside the cloud, the world became orange. Thick amber gas pressed against the viewport. The hull groaned, not a gentle sound, the sound of metal being squeezed by something enormous and indifferent. Temperature warnings flashed. Turbulence slammed them sideways. Then up, then down hard enough that Lyra's teeth clicked. Cade held the controls steady, barely. This ship was not built for atmospheric insertion. Courier vessels were designed for dock-to-dock transit, clean corridors, traffic lanes, not the churning belly of a gas giant where wind speeds exceeded the velocity of most commercial starships. Lyra gripped the console with both hands. Her father had made her study atmospheric shipping routes, the physics of moving cargo through hostile planetary environments. She had complained, called it unnecessary. What noble daughter needs to understand methane compression ratios? This one, apparently, density spike, port side, avoid. Cade adjusted, sulfur band ahead, corrosive, drop below it, dropping. She read the numbers the way she read financial reports. Patterns, flows, where the pressure went, where it didn't, where safe corridors formed between zones of destruction. There, upper band, 30 degrees north of the equatorial storm, Methane concentration creates a sensor shadow, dense enough to hide us, thin enough not to crush the hull. Cade banked into the corridor. The turbulence eased, slightly, like stepping from a hurricane into a storm. Not safe, less deadly, left, 2 degrees. Done. Pressure spike ahead, drop 40 meters, dropping, and something happened in that cloud. Between the density readings and the course corrections, between the calm calls and the steady hands, they became partners, not employer and employee, not noble and hired guard. Two people solving a problem together, her knowledge filling his gaps, his instinct filling hers. A conversation without words that somehow said everything that mattered. Clear corridor, 600 meters, straight. Lyra watched the interceptors on the sensor display, scattered, confused, their formation broken by interference. One had already pulled back above the cloud layer. They can't find us. Cade exhaled, not relief, not yet, but the edge of it. Then the port engine coughed. The sound was wrong, mechanical, wet, like a living thing choking on something it couldn't swallow. Lyra looked at the diagnostic panel. Coolant failure. The same coupling Cade had tightened hours ago, the one that had been repaired and repaired again, and was now, finally, done. How bad. The engine died. The wayward lurched sideways, then began to sink, deeper into the atmosphere, toward the layers where density became crushing and heat became lethal. Cade fought the controls. One engine. Not enough to climb. We need to exit. Now. Lyra calculated. Faster than she'd ever calculated anything in her life. Not for a grade. Not for a negotiation. For survival. 17 degrees starboard. There's a thermal updraft in the equatorial boundary. If we catch it, it'll push us out. If 90 seconds. Then the updraft shifts south. Cade turned. The wayward groaned, shuddered, caught the edge of the updraft, and rose, shaking, screaming, every rivet protesting against physics. They breached the cloud layer. And there, waiting, like something out of a story Lyra would have dismissed as sentimental yesterday. A ship, old, massive, hull carrying faded military markings, scarred with battle damage that had been repaired but never polished. A vessel that wore its history on its skin. The interceptors, the remaining 3, immediately broke pursuit, scattered like animals encountering something larger, older, more dangerous by reputation alone. A transmission arrived. Unidentified courier. Transmit credentials. Cade stared at the vessel, and for the first time since Lyra had met him, he looked uncertain, not afraid, uncertain. Like a man who had just walked into a room he thought he'd left for the last time. Wayward. Your port engine is venting coolant. Dock before you lose containment. The voice was older, female, calm in the way that Cade was calm. The calm of someone who had learned it through practice rather than temperament. Cade's hand hovered over the communications panel. Didn't press. Lyra looked at the display. CSR Resolute. Decommissioned outpost support cruiser. You know that ship. No, you are a terrible liar. Recent development. The interceptors held position beyond weapons range. Waiting. They wouldn't approach the cruiser. This is our only safe option. Cade exhaled. Long, through his nose. The exhale of a man about to walk through a door he'd spent years avoiding. That's what worries me. 20 minutes later, the Wayward limped into the Resolute's docking bay. The cruiser smelled of machine oil, cold steel, and time. Not the sterile kind of old, the lived-in kind. Metal that had been touched by thousands of hands over decades. Corridors worn smooth by boots. Control panels with faded labels. The kind of ship that had stories embedded in every scratch on its hull. Half its lights were dead. The rest flickered occasionally, like the ship was dreaming. Retired military personnel moved among cargo crates and repair equipment. Old soldiers, old mechanics, old medics. People who had served somewhere, done something, seen things that don't fit into civilian conversation, and then kept going. Because stopping felt worse than continuing. because the work gave their hands something to do while their minds replayed things they couldn't change. Lyra recognized the atmosphere immediately. It reminded her of her father's private study. Not the decorations, not the furniture, the feeling, the weight of things remembered. Cade stepped down the ramp first. His shoulders were different, not tense, braced, like a man walking into a windstorm he knew was coming. An elderly alien mechanic approached. Gray scales covered his face, weathered by decades. One mechanical leg clicked against the deck. Military manufacture. Old. Outdated by 20 years at least. Engine trouble coolant line, Cade said. The mechanic looked at his diagnostic tablet. Human design mostly. Ugly machines. They last. So do infections. Cade almost smiled. Almost. Then the mechanic looked up from the tablet, and everything stopped. The tablet slipped from his fingers, struck the deck. The sound was small, but in that moment, it was the loudest thing in the docking bay. The old alien stared at Cade. Not confusion, not curiosity, recognition, the kind that hits you like a wave, knocks you off your feet, fills your eyes with water before your brain can tell your heart to calm down. Commander. Cade's face closed. Every door, every window. Shut. You've got the wrong man. The mechanic stepped closer, his mechanical leg clicking, his breathing changed. Rough, wet, the sound of someone trying not to cry and failing. No. Lyra watched, couldn't move, couldn't look away. I was there. The veteran's voice cracked like old wood splitting. Western evacuation corridor. 5th civilian column. The same western gate. The same words the assassin had used. Lyra's heart beat slower. She could feel each one. The veteran continued. My unit was ordered to withdraw. Cade said nothing. You stayed. Silence. My wife. The old man's voice broke completely. My 2 daughters. They were in that column. Cade closed his eyes. 18,000 civilians crossed that gate because you refused to leave. The docking bay seemed to hold its breath. Every mechanic, every technician, every tired old soldier who happened to be nearby stopped what they were doing. The veteran straightened his damaged leg, slowly, with effort, and raised his hand in a military salute. Cade opened his eyes. Don't! The veteran held the salute. Lower your hand. The veteran didn't move. Please, that word, please, from a man who never asked for anything, who slept on floors, who charged 73 credits, who bandaged enemies. Please. The veteran finally lowered his hand, wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. I thought you were dead. Cade looked at him, and for the first time, Lyra saw sadness on his face that wasn't hidden, wasn't controlled, wasn't packed away into the box where he kept everything that hurt. Some days I did too. He walked past the veteran, through the docking bay, and disappeared through the interior doors. Lyra remained, frozen, staring at the space where Cade Morrow had been standing. The veteran bent to retrieve his tablet. Lyra crouched first, picked it up, handed it back. Their eyes met. Who is he? She whispered. The old alien looked toward the doors Cade had walked through, and his expression changed. Not sadness anymore. Something deeper, harder. The kind of reverence that isn't performed, that lives in the bones of people who owe their lives to someone who never asked to be thanked. Not Cade Morrow. Then who searched the military archive. Ask for the ghost of Cathara. But Lyra didn't search the archive, because a voice stopped her. You're the one who hired him. Lyra turned. A woman stood in the corridor behind the docking bay. Tall, lean, short gray-streaked hair. A face that had been beautiful once and was now something better. Experienced, weathered, strong. She wore a captain's insignia on a jacket that had been mended more times than Lyra could count. Tessa Varn, captain of the Resolute. Lyra studied her. Military bearing, steady eyes, hands that hung loose at her sides. The same way Cade's did. You know him. I served under him. Lyra's markings brightened. On Cathara. Tessa nodded, then looked toward the interior doors. the same direction Cade had disappeared. He won't tell you. So I will. Why? Because someone should, and because you're walking into something with that man beside you, and you deserve to know who's standing next to you. Lyra followed Tessa to a small observation room on the Resolute's upper deck. 2 chairs, a viewport overlooking the docking bay below, cold coffee in a thermos that looked older than the ship. Tessa poured 2 cups, sat down, and told the story. Not through an archive, not through a holographic display, through her voice, her memory, the way soldiers tell war stories, not the Hollywood version, the real one, the one that starts slow and hurts at the end. The Kethera conflict lasted 11 years, Tessa said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone who had learned to talk about this without breaking. Most of the time. Border world. 2 galactic factions wanted it. Neither was willing to say so publicly. So they funded proxies, armed local militias, let the planet tear itself apart while diplomats gave speeches about peace. She sipped the terrible coffee. Human coalition forces were deployed in year 3. Peacekeepers. That was the word they used. We were supposed to stabilize the situation, protect civilian corridors, maintain neutrality. Lyra listened. By year 7, neutrality was a joke. We were fighting both sides, and neither side cared about the civilians caught between them. Tessa looked at the viewport. Cade took command of the Western Gate defensive position in year 9. He was 23, youngest commander in the sector. Nobody wanted the assignment. The Western Gate was a death sentence, longest exposure corridor, worst supply lines, highest civilian traffic. Why did he take it? Tessa looked at her, and her expression changed, softened. The way it does when someone remembers the moment they understood who a person really was. Because that's where the children were. Silence. The Western Gate evacuation corridor was the primary route for civilian families. Schools, medical facilities, orphanages, thousands of children, some carried by parents, some walking alone because their parents were already dead. Cade requested the assignment. Nobody else wanted it. He walked into the command post on his first day, looked at the defensive positions, looked at the civilian corridor, and the first thing he said, not to his officers, not to his superiors, to the sergeant managing the evacuation queue. How many children came through today? Tessa set down her cup. That's who he was, from day 1, not counting enemy positions, not measuring tactical advantage, counting children. For 3 years, he held that gate, lost soldiers, gained replacements, lost them too, rebuilt, adapted, held, and every night, after every engagement, he walked the civilian corridor, talked to the families waiting, learned their names, remembered their faces, not because it was his job, because it was him. Then the final evacuation. Tessa's voice changed, slightly, a crack in the controlled surface. Coalition command delayed the withdrawal order by 6 hours. Politics. Nobody wanted to admit Kethera was lost. By the time they authorized evacuation, 3 corridors were already overrun. Only the Western Gate remained. Tessa nodded. 1 gate. 20,000 civilians trying to get through. Enemy forces closing from 3 directions. In Cade's unit, 340 soldiers against an army. Lyra's hands were still in her lap, but her markings had gone completely quiet. Dim, as though her body understood that this moment didn't need light. Transports could carry 47 at a time. The officer in charge of loading told Cade that command had ordered officers evacuated first. Protocol, rank structure, standard procedure. Cade asked how many children were waiting. 31. He said load them. The officer said that wasn't protocol. Cade said, then command can come down here and argue. Tessa almost smiled. That was him. That was always him. Not dramatic, not heroic in the way the movies make it. Just clear. Like the answer was so obvious that debating it was the real insanity. What happened next? The line held. 1 hour, 2. Every transport that left carried civilians. Women, children, elderly, the wounded. Cade's soldiers stayed. 312 of them died. Tessa said the number the way you say the name of someone you loved, carefully, like it might break if you weren't gentle with it. She paused, looked at her hands, old scars on the knuckles, same as Cade's. I knew their names too, not all of them, but enough. I knew Mason, 26, from a city called Ohio on Earth. Terrible singer, sang anyway, every morning, like the war was just background noise to his personal concert. She almost smiled. I knew a woman named Torres, medic, carried candy in her field kit for the children in the evacuation lines, said sugar healed faster than medicine. She wasn't wrong. Lyra listened, her markings completely still. They held for 6 hours, until 18,000 civilians had crossed through the gate and boarded evacuation transports. 18,000, counted, verified. Families, children, elderly, the wounded, every single one. And when the last transport lifted off, Cade was the last person standing on the ground. Tessa stopped, took a breath, let it out slowly. Tessa stopped. Lyra waited. They built a monument before they finished identifying the dead. Tessa's voice was barely above a whisper. Politicians gave speeches. Medals were struck. The galaxy called him a hero, the ghost of Cathara, the man who held the gate. She looked at Lyra. And Cade, who had just buried 312 people he knew by name, was expected to smile for cameras. He disappeared instead. How long ago? 8 years. Nobody knew if he was alive or dead. The name became legend. The man became a ghost for real, until you found him, selling himself for 73 credits a day on a station exchange. Lyra looked at her hands. They were trembling, slightly. The way hands tremble when the body understands something the mind is still processing. He checked the ladder rungs before I climbed them, she said softly, in a ventilation shaft. He didn't think I noticed. Tessa smiled, a real one, sad around the edges. The smile of someone who recognized the man she was describing in the detail Lyra had noticed. That's him. That's always been him. Not the monument, not the legend, the man who checks the ladder rungs. But Tessa wasn't finished, because there was a fourth twist, and it was the one that would change everything. After the war, Tessa said, I spent years investigating the weapons supply chain, how both factions armed themselves, who manufactured the weapons, who shipped them, who profited. Lyra's markings flickered. It took 6 years to trace the network. Shell corporations, fake manifests, redirected cargo. Someone had built an invisible pipeline that armed both sides of the conflict, prolonged the war, profited from destruction, and then profited again from reconstruction contracts. Lyra's stomach tightened. The weapons that killed 312 of our soldiers, Tessa said. She looked at Lyra. Were shipped through the Aevyn family commercial network. The sentence didn't land immediately. It traveled, slowly, through Lyra's ears, through her mind, through every assumption she had ever made about her family, her legacy, her name, Aevyn. The name she had worn like armor her entire life. The name that opened doors, commanded respect, meant something in 11 star systems. That name, on the shipping manifests, on the cargo containers, on the weapons that tore through the Western Gate and killed 312 soldiers who trusted a 23-year-old commander to bring them home. She stood, sat down, stood again. Her markings flickered, erratically, like a signal losing its frequency. That's not possible. Tessa said nothing. She had delivered this information before. To military investigators, to journalists, to politicians who nodded and did nothing. She knew what it looked like when someone's world rearranged itself. My father would never, I'm not talking about your father. Sorath. Tessa nodded. Lyra's vision blurred. Not tears, something worse. The world rearranging itself. Every memory she had of her uncle. Sorath at family dinners. Sorath teaching her to read trade manifests when she was 12. Sorath at her academy graduation. Standing in the front row. Smiling. Proud. Sorath holding her hand at her father's funeral. His gentle smile. His soft voice. Tragic. He'd called it tragic because he'd arranged it. And before that, For 20 years before that, he'd arranged something worse. He'd sold weapons to both sides of a war, prolonged the killing, profited from the dying, and then profited again from rebuilding what he'd helped destroy. And 312 soldiers had paid the price, including every person under Cade Morrow's command who never walked back through the Western Gate. Lyra looked at Tessa. Does Cade know? Tessa's expression answered before her words did. Yes. Lyra found him in the Wayward's engine compartment. Same position as before, tightening something, hands dark with grease, coat off, sleeves rolled. The burn mark from the market fight visible on his forearm, a thin red line healing slower than it should. She stood in the doorway. He didn't look up, but he knew she was there. He always knew. She talked to you, he said. Lyra's voice came out differently than she expected. Quiet, not accusatory, not angry, something worse. Betrayed. Not by him, by the universe, by the cruel coincidence that the man protecting her had lost everything because of the family she belonged to. You knew. You knew my family's company shipped the weapons that killed your soldiers, and you took my contract anyway. Cade's hand stopped. The wrench went still, but he didn't put it down, like he needed to hold something. Why? I was quiet for a long time. The engine compartment hummed. Something dripped. A coupling somewhere that needed replacing. Always something that needed replacing on this ship. Lyra waited, her markings shifting, pale, uncertain, the light moving across her cheeks like thoughts she couldn't hide. Then he looked at her. You are not your family. Lyra shook her head. That's not enough. That cannot be enough. It's all I've got. 312 people. My family's name is on the weapons that killed them. Your uncle's name, not yours. My blood, my inheritance. My Cade stood, looked at her directly, close enough that she could see the old scars on his knuckles, the burn mark on his forearm from the market fight, the lines around his eyes that shouldn't be there at 31. You didn't sell those weapons. You didn't authorize those shipments. You didn't know. But my father did. The words came out before she could stop them, and they hurt more than anything Tessa had said, because Lyra had just heard that her father, the man who taught her to look for truth, who placed a data chip on her desk before he died, had known for 20 years. Cade watched her. Your father tried to stop it. That's why he's dead. Lyra's eyes burned. He knew for 20 years. He tried at the end. That's not the same as trying. No, it's not. And you still took my contract, knowing all of this. Cade wiped his hands on a rag, slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. I took your contract because you walked into that exchange with 81 credits and enough stubbornness to hire a stranger. Because you bought transit passes on a black market without blinking. Because when I asked you to navigate through a gas cloud that could have killed us, you didn't hesitate. He looked at her. You are not your family. You are not your uncle. You are not even your father's silence. You are you. Lyra's markings dimmed, nearly dark, and you're standing here, angry about what your name is attached to, which means you're exactly the kind of person who should be the one to make it right. Lyra looked at him. His eyes were steady, blue-gray, the same eyes that had gone cold in the market, that had gone empty when the assassin whispered Cathara, that had closed shut when the veteran saluted. Now they were open, not all the way, but enough. Enough for her to see something behind the walls, something that looked like faith, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that simply stands in a room and waits for you to notice it's there. He believed in her. This man, who had lost 312 people because of her family's name, believed in her, in that. More than any argument, more than any evidence, more than any rational calculation of debt and blame and responsibility. That changed everything. She didn't respond, not with words. She wiped her eyes, straightened her coat, lifted her chin. And Cade saw something in that moment, something he recognized, because he'd seen it before. In young officers who discovered the cause they'd been fighting for was broken, and chose to keep fighting anyway. Not for the cause, for the people. Lyra Aevyn was not her uncle. She was better. And that, Cade knew. made her more dangerous to Sorath than any weapon. The notification came 40 minutes later. Lyra's wrist terminal vibrated. A message, encrypted, routed through 3 relay stations. From Olin Drask. Lyra's heart lifted. Olin, her assistant, her friend, the one person outside her father she trusted completely, the one person who hadn't answered her messages since everything fell apart. Lady Aevyn, I know what happened. I can help. Send me your position. I'll route secure transport. Lyra showed Cade. He read it. His face didn't change. Don't respond. He's my most trusted person. Was he? As Olin has been with me for 4 years. He managed my father's personal schedule. He was present when you discovered the shipping discrepancies. Lyra paused. Yes. And after you told him, everything went wrong. Lyra's stomach dropped. That doesn't mean it doesn't either. Cade, I trust him. Cade looked at her, not arguing, not dismissing. Patient. Trust is a door that opens from the inside. Someone told me that recently. Lyra stared at him. I never said that. No, but you showed it. When you handed me that data chip on the Wayward, you didn't announce it. You just opened the door because you decided I'd earned it. He looked at the message on her wrist. Has Olin earned it? Yes. Then send the position, but don't send our real one. Send coordinates 30 minutes away. If Olin is who you believe he is, nothing happens. If he isn't, we'll know. Yes. Lyra sent the coordinates. Altered. 30 minutes offset from the Resolute's actual position. Then they waited. 42 minutes later, 4 interceptors dropped out of transit at the exact coordinates Lyra had sent Olin Drask. Exact. Not close, not approximate. Exact. Lyra watched the tactical display, the blips appearing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Precisely where she'd told Olin they would be. Precisely where she'd told the man she trusted like a brother. Her markings went dark, not dim, dark. The kind of dark that happens when everything you believed about a person collapses at once. When trust, real trust, the kind built over 4 years, over shared meals, over late nights reviewing trade documents. Over the morning, Olin brought her tea without being asked, and she'd thought, this is what loyalty looks like. Breaks. And doesn't break clean, breaks ragged, leaves pieces of itself embedded in you, so that later, weeks later, months later, you'll be doing something ordinary, making tea, reviewing a document, and you'll find a shard, and it'll cut. Cade didn't say anything. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't say I warned you. He didn't say be more careful next time. He just stood beside her, and after a long silence, Lyra spoke. Now I know who's worth trusting. She looked at him. Cade looked back. And something between them. Something that had been building since the exchange floor. Since the market fight. Since the corridor outside her cabin. Settled into place. The transmission came 1 hour later. Vera House cipher. The encryption key only 4 people possessed. 3 were dead. Lyra accepted it. Lyra Aevyn appeared above the console. Tall, silver ceremonial robes, pale blue skin darker than Lyra's. Handsome in the way that powerful men are handsome. Polished, maintained, every crease deliberate, every gesture rehearsed. He looked like their father. That was the worst part. Same jawline, same eyes, same way of tilting his head when he was about to say something he wanted you to believe. His smile was gentle. It made Lyra's skin crawl, because she recognized it now. Not warmth, performance. The smile of a man who had practiced sincerity until it became indistinguishable from the real thing. Almost. Lyra. Uncle. I've been worried. How touching. Sorath's eyes shifted toward Cade, standing behind Lyra. Old coat, old weapon, arms folded. And you've hired a human. Cade leaned back against the wall. Apparently I'm fashionable. Sorath ignored him, returned his gaze to Lyra. Return home. Your accounts will be restored. Your position secured. All of this unpleasantness can end. And my father's shipping records. Silence. Tiny, a fraction of a second. But Lyra saw it, and Cade saw it. The micro pause of a man deciding what to deny. Soreth smiled again. You're confused. Grief does terrible things to judgment. He had 3 artificial hearts. Cade coughed. Lyra glanced at him. Sorry, he said. Still funny. Soreth's smile vanished. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Lyra leaned toward the hologram. Then explain it. Come home. No. Soreth's gaze became cold. The gentle uncle disappeared. Something older emerged. Something that had been hiding behind ceremony and silver robes for decades. You've always mistaken privilege for protection, and you've mistaken family for ownership. Cade's eyebrow rose slightly. Soreth looked at him, held his gaze for a long moment. Then, your father knew. Lyra. For 20 years, he discovered the manifests, the shipments, all of it, and he chose to say nothing because he understood that some truths are too expensive to tell. The words hit Lyra like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, because they might be true. You think you're different from him, Soreth continued. You think you're braver, you're not. You're younger, that's all. Give it time. You'll learn to keep quiet too. The transmission ended. The cockpit went silent. Lyra sat perfectly still, staring at the space where her uncle's face had been. Cade stood beside her. That went well. He confessed nothing. He confirmed everything. How he offered money before asking what evidence you had. Lyra considered that. And the thing about my father, Cade, was quiet. Did he know? Lyra whispered. For 20 years. Did my father really know and say nothing? I don't know. But you think he did. I think good people sometimes make terrible choices and then spend the rest of their lives trying to fix them too late. Like hiding a data chip on your daughter's desk the morning before someone kills you. Yes. Lyra closed her eyes. Her father knew. For 20 years. Watched the weapons ship through his company's network. Watched the war burn. Watched soldiers die. And said nothing. Until the end. Until a data chip on a desk and a dead man's apology. Was that enough? Was dying for the truth the same as living for it? Lyra didn't know, and the not knowing hurt worse than any answer could. A second alert sounded. Family network access revocation initiated. Time remaining. 10 hours. Then another. Client financial status. Insolvent. Automatic contract termination accelerated. Lyra opened her eyes, looked at the display. Soreth hadn't just frozen her remaining credits. He had erased them. The contract timer appeared, glowing amber between them. Time remaining, 1 hour, 59:59, 59:58, 59:57. Lyra watched the numbers fall, each second a small death, each digit dropping like a leaf from a tree that was running out of autumn. She looked at Cade. So that's it. Cade stared at the timer, his face unreadable. But his hands told the truth. The left one had closed into a fist, not anger, resistance, like a man bracing against a wind that was trying to push him out a door he didn't want to walk through. 59:41. In less than 60 minutes, the cheapest bodyguard in the galaxy would have no legal obligation to protect her. No contract, no payment, no reason to stay. And Lyra Aevyn would be alone, on a decommissioned military cruiser, with a data chip she couldn't decode, a family that wanted her dead, and the knowledge that her name was written on the weapons that killed 312 soldiers, including the soldiers of the man standing beside her, the man who slept outside her door, the man who checked ladder rungs, the man who bandaged enemies. 59:12. Cade closed the display. Lyra blinked. What are you doing? Get your coat. Why? He holstered the old weapon, checked the charge, checked the safety. The same automatic motion she'd watched a dozen times now. Muscle memory, ritual, the prayer of a soldier before he walks toward the thing that might kill him. Because your uncle just made a mistake. What mistake? Cade opened the cockpit door, looked back at her, and for the first time since the veteran's salute, something in his eyes wasn't guarded, wasn't controlled, wasn't locked behind doors. It was warm. He thinks I'm protecting you for the money. Money. The timer kept counting. 58:33. 58:32, and Lyra Aevyn stood up, got her coat, and followed the ghost of Cathara into whatever came next. Because a contract could tell Cade Morrow when to stop being her guard. It could not tell him when to stop caring whether she survived. Antara Station grew in the viewport like something that had been waiting for them. Not beautiful. Antara had never been beautiful. It had been built for commerce, for volume, for the relentless movement of goods and money across 11 star systems. 6 industrial rings surrounding a central spindle. Thousands of docking arms extending into darkness like the ribs of something enormous and dead. The Aevyn family owned most of it. Lyra had grown up here, walked these corridors, known the names of dock workers and station administrators, eaten breakfast overlooking the cargo bays where her family's ships loaded and unloaded goods that fed entire colonies. She had felt safe here once. Now it looked like a fortress, and the man inside it wanted her gone. Or worse. Lyra pressed her hand against the data chip in her pocket. Still there, still warm. Her father's last message waiting to be decoded, the key to everything. She looked at the contract timer on Cade's wrist. 43:17, 43 minutes. That was how long she had left with him. How long before the numbers hit 0 and the man beside her became a stranger with no obligation. No contract. No reason to stand between her and a bullet. Don't look at it, Cade said. She hadn't realized he was watching her watch it. I wasn't looking. You were calculating. I was observing. You were calculating how many minutes you have left to feel safe. Lyra said nothing, because he was right, and because saying so out loud would make her markings do something she didn't want him to see. Cade brought the wayward in low, beneath the main traffic lanes, beneath the scanner arrays, beneath the level where anyone important would be watching. Dock 12, he said. Lyra frowned. My family's private docks are on Ring 1, which is why we're not using them. Dock 12 is freight. Exactly. The Wayward settled into a berth between 2 cargo haulers. Old ships, ugly ships, the kind that nobody looked at twice. Cade had chosen the slot carefully. Lyra could tell. Blocked sightlines from the upper observation decks. No direct camera angle from station security. A maintenance corridor within 30 meters. He'd been here before. Or he'd memorized the station layout during transit. Either way, it scared her a little. How good he was at disappearing. A customs transmission arrived. Courier Wayward. Transmit cargo declaration. Cade answered immediately. Replacement agricultural filtration membranes. Lyra stared at him. We don't have agricultural filtration membranes, the customs officer replied. Proceed to Dock 12. Cade muted communications. We also don't have time for honesty. The hatch opened. Cold air entered. Fuel, metal, industrial coolant, the smell of Antara Station, the smell of home. Except home was trying to kill her now. So the smell made her stomach turn instead of settle. Cade stepped onto this platform first. Eyes moving, always moving. Scanning the dock workers, the cargo cranes, the surveillance positions. Lyra followed, silver-white hair hidden beneath a hooded traveling cloak. Luminous markings dimmed as far as she could control them, which was not as far as she wanted. Rule 8, Cade murmured. I thought there were only 7. Don't become memorable. Lyra looked at him. You are literally known across the galaxy as the ghost of Cathara, which is why I learned the rule. They moved through the freight workers. Cade carried a maintenance case in one hand, walked like someone annoyed about repairing machinery. Shoulders slouched, pace steady, utterly forgettable. Lyra tried to copy him. You look suspicious, he whispered. I am pretending to be annoyed. Your Vaori nobility, pretend less. Her markings brightened beneath the hood. Irritation, which, actually, made her look more like an annoyed maintenance worker than her previous attempt. Cade noticed. Better. They reached a service elevator. Lyra used an old family credential, one she'd kept in her luggage, low-level access, the kind that administrative staff carried. Beneath notice. Access accepted. Archive level, she said. The elevator descended. The contract timer on Cade's wrist glowed amber. 28:14. Lyra looked at it. Cade sighed. You're doing it. I am aware. The doors opened onto a corridor. Silent. Lyra noticed immediately. No ventilation hum, no footsteps, no service drones, no background noise of any kind. Just silence. The kind that doesn't mean empty. The kind that means someone cleared the room and forgot to leave the normal sounds running. Quiet corridor, Lyra whispered. Cade glanced at her. See, education works. He drew his sidearm. The old one. Obsolete. The one that every mercenary on Helion Station would have laughed at. Lyra had stopped finding it funny 3 days ago. They moved forward, 50 meters to the archive room, the longest 50 meters of Lyra's life. Every step echoing, every shadow a possible threat, every doorway a possible ambush. Cade walked ahead, not far. 3 steps, enough to be between her and whatever came first. Always between her and whatever came first. She had stopped questioning it, not because she'd accepted being protected, because she'd accepted that this was who he was, the man who stood in front, not for money, not for glory, not for 73 credits. Because the space between danger and the person behind him was the only place Cade Morrow had ever felt like he belonged. The archive room. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for the terminal. Not fear, anticipation. 6 days of running, 3 days of surviving. And every answer she needed was in this room. She inserted the data chip, her father's last gift, ceramic-coated, warm from her body, warm from the days she'd carried it against her chest like a second heartbeat. The terminal recognized it. Vera-class encryption detected. Authorization required. Lyra pressed her palm against the scanner. Aevyn authorization confirmed. Access expires 19 minutes. 19 minutes. To find what her father died for. She opened the shipping logs, thousands of records cascading across the holographic display. Dates, destinations, cargo manifests, payment trails. Her fingers moved fast. Come on, Vesper shipments, restricted cargo, military components. Then she found it, Manifest 77Y9. She opened the file, and her stomach turned. Weapon shipments disguised as medical equipment, agricultural machinery, humanitarian aid. The labels were clean, professional, the kind of documentation that would pass any standard inspection. Because the people who created it knew exactly what standard inspections looked for. Payment flows routed through shell corporations, 14 of them, each registered in a different system, each connected through a chain of transactions so complex that tracing it required the kind of knowledge only someone inside the family would possess, someone like her father. And at the bottom of the chain, controlling every shell, authorizing every shipment, Lyra Aevyn. Then the data chip unlocked a second file, a recording. Her father's face appeared above the terminal, and Lyra stopped breathing, because there he was, Lyra Aevyn, the man who had loved her more carefully than anyone in the galaxy, who had woken early every morning to eat breakfast with her before her lessons began, who had taught her to read trade manifests, to understand infrastructure, to look for truth in the spaces between numbers. He looked older in the recording than the last time she'd seen him alive, which was impossible because the recording was made before his death. But grief does something to memory. It sharpens the good parts and blurs everything else. So the face she remembered was smoother, younger, happier, and the face looking at her now was tired, lined around the eyes, carrying something heavy behind them. If you're seeing this, Lyra, then I failed. Her breath caught. Her markings went still. Cade looked back from his position by the door, saw her face, the expression on it, the way her hands had stopped moving and were now just resting on the console, like birds that had forgotten how to fly. He said nothing, turned back to the corridor, because some moments belong to the person having them, and a good guard knows when to watch the door instead of the client. Her father continued. Lyra has been supplying weapons to both sides of the border conflict for over 20 years. He prolongs the fighting, profits from the destruction, then profits again from reconstruction contracts. I discovered the manifests 11 years ago. 11 years. Lyra's markings dimmed. Not 20. 11, Lyra had told her 20. had said her father knew from the beginning, had used that lie to make her father seem complicit, to make Lyra doubt the man who loved her. 11 years, and her father had spent every one of them trying to build a case, gathering evidence, documenting transactions, waiting for enough proof to bring Sorath down without destroying the family, without destroying the thousands of employees who depended on the Aevyn trade network for their livelihoods. He hadn't been silent, he'd been careful, and it had killed him. "Do not confront him alone," her father's recording said. "Send this evidence to coalition authorities. The files are complete. Everything is here." A pause. "I'm sorry. Lyra, I should have told you sooner. I wanted to protect you from this, from knowing what our family name had become. But protection and truth cannot live in the same house forever." His image flickered. "Be braver than I was." The recording ended. Lyra stared at the empty space where her father had been, and for the first time in 6 days, she cried, not long, not dramatically, just a few seconds, a few tears tracing down her pale blue cheeks, following the lines of her luminous markings, which had gone completely dark. Then she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and began the transfer. Transfer initiated. 12%. Cade's voice came from the doorway. Company. Footsteps. Many. Coming from the main corridor. 31%. Lyra's hands didn't stop. Couldn't stop. "Lady Aevyn," a voice announced from the corridor. Amplified. "Official, step away from the terminal." She recognized the voice. Sorath's security chief, a man named Voss who had attended her birthday celebrations, who had bowed to her, called her lady, smiled. Now he was pointing weapons at the door. 48%. Cade. "How many? 6, maybe 8. Those are different numbers. Both are too many. Can you?" "Yes. You don't know what I was going to ask. You were going to ask if I can handle them." "Yes. What if I was going to ask something else you weren't?" She wasn't. The corridor lights died. Emergency red flooded the doorway. Standard tactical approach. Kill the lights. Disorient the target. Move in. Except their target had Cade Morrow, who had spent 3 years defending a gate against an army, who had once held a position for 6 hours while 18,000 civilians walked to safety behind him. 6 guards in a corridor was not his first problem. 59%. Cade fired once, not at the guards, at the overhead suppression pipe. The same move from the Helion market. His signature, his calling card. Find the environment. Use the environment. Steam exploded across the corridor. White vapor swallowed the doorway. Visibility collapsed to 0. Lyra heard Cade move. Into the steam, toward the guards. Not away from them, never away. She heard impacts, short, precise. The sound of someone who knew exactly where to strike and how hard. Not harder, never harder than necessary. A weapon clattering against the floor. A body hitting the wall. Not the sound of death. The sound of someone being put down carefully, firmly, but not permanently. Because Cade Morrow didn't kill when he didn't have to. Not because he couldn't, because he chose not to. And that choice, that deliberate restraint, was the thing that separated him from every other soldier Lyra had ever heard of. 72%. Someone fired a weapon in the steam. Blue flash, wild, panicked, missed everything. More impacts. A grunt, something metal spinning across the floor. 84%. Silence, then footsteps. Coming back. Cade emerged from the steam, breathing harder than before, a bruise darkening his jaw. Blood on his knuckles. Not his. A torn seam on his coat sleeve that he would probably fix later with the same careful hands that had bandaged an assassin on a market floor 3 days ago. Almost 93%. Contract timer on his wrist. 0:32. Lyra stared at it. Cade, don't look at the timer. 0:24. I'm not looking. You're looking. 0:17. She looked. He looked at her looking and almost smiled. Hours 10. The terminal chimed. Transfer complete. And at the same moment, the contract display activated between them. Amber light. Official text. Small words that carried enormous weight. Service period expired. Payment status terminated. Cade Morrow is no longer contractually responsible for client security. The words hung in the air. Behind Cade, the corridor filled with approaching footsteps. More guards. The first wave had been 6. This was more. A lot more. Soreth wasn't taking chances. Lyra forced herself to speak. You fulfilled the contract. Yes. You can leave. Yes. The words sat between them. Heavy. Final. Like a door closing. Lyra lowered her eyes, because her markings were doing something she couldn't control. Brightening, not from fear, from something else. Something she hadn't expected to feel standing in an archive room, surrounded by unconscious guards, and the evidence of her family's crimes. Loss. The anticipation of loss. The feeling of something precious about to be taken, not by force, by circumstance. Thank you, Mr. Morrow. Cade was silent, and the silence lasted long enough for Lyra to understand that the next few seconds would tell her everything she needed to know about who this man really was. Then Cade reached into his pocket and pulled out the contract token. Small, metal, 73 credits, scratched, worn. The exact token that had been generated on the exchange floor when Lyra pressed her palm against the payment scanner. When she had 81 credits left in the galaxy and chose to spend 73 of them on a man everyone else had ignored. He'd kept it, this whole time, through the market fight, through the wayward, through the gas cloud and the resolute in every corridor and every bullet and every moment that could have been his last. He'd kept the token, as though it meant something, as though being chosen, even for 73 credits, even by a stranger, even at the bottom of a price list in a room full of better options, mattered. He took her hand. His fingers were warm, rough, scarred across the knuckles, the hands of a man who had built things and broken things and put them back together, who had held weapons and held wounded enemies and held the line at a gate while 18,000 people walked to safety behind him. He opened her fingers, gently, placed the token in her palm, and closed her fingers around it. The metal was warm from his body, from the pocket over his heart where he'd carried it for 3 days. Lyra looked down at it. What are you doing returning company property? This isn't company property. It is now. Her eyes burned. Her markings flickered. She tightened her fingers around the token, around the warmth of it, around the weight of what it meant. Then he turned, toward the corridor, toward the footsteps, toward the guards. Lyra caught his sleeve. Cade. He looked back. You don't owe me anything. For several seconds, he simply watched her, and his face did something she had never seen it do before. Not in the exchange, not in the market fight, not in the gas cloud, or the resolute, or the long quiet hours on the wayward. It softened. All the walls, all the doors, all the carefully constructed barriers he'd built between himself and the world. They didn't fall, but they opened, just enough for her to see what was behind them. Not a soldier, not a ghost, not a legend. A man who had been alone for 8 years and had just remembered what it felt like to not be. That, he said quietly, is why this part matters. The guards appeared through the thinning steam. Cade stepped between them and Lyra. No contract, no payment, no obligation. Just a man in an old coat standing where danger had to pass before it could reach her. But Lyra didn't stay behind him. Not this time. She stepped forward, beside him, not behind. Cade glanced at her. Surprise, brief, then something else. Respect. What are you doing my part? Your part involves staying alive. My part involves making sure my father didn't die for nothing. The words came out steady, stronger than she expected, stronger than she felt. But that was something Cade had taught her without saying it. You don't have to feel brave to act brave. You just have to act. She turned toward the archive terminal. The evidence was transferred, complete. Every file, every manifest, every payment trail, sitting in a secure packet on her personal device. But a file on a personal device could be destroyed, confiscated, deleted. Sorath's people could take it. Coalition investigators could bury it. Politicians could classify it. There were 1,000 ways to make truth disappear if you had enough power and enough patience. Lyra needed it somewhere that none of those things could reach. Everywhere. She opened the station's commercial broadcast system, the Aevyn network, the infrastructure her family had built over 4 generations. Every relay station, every communications node, every terminal, every screen on Antara Station, and every ship within broadcast range. She knew this system, not the way a technician knows it, the way a daughter knows her father's house. Every room, every closet, every hidden passage, every override code that existed because her father had insisted she understand how information moved through their empire. Know where the money goes when it doesn't want to be found. Know where the truth goes when it needs to be heard. Her father's voice, in her mind, clear, steady, like he was standing beside her. Her fingers moved across the terminal. Fast, precise, routing protocols, authentication overrides, broadcast amplification. The same hands that had navigated a gas cloud, that had bought forged transit passes on a black market, that had held a ceramic data chip against her chest for 3 days, like a letter from someone she would never stop missing. Broadcasting, she said. Cade looked at the guards advancing, then at Lyra. How long? 30 seconds. The lead guard raised his weapon. Lady Aevyn, step away from the terminal. Final warning. Lyra didn't step away. Instead, she pressed the broadcast command, and every screen on Antara Station changed. Every terminal in every corridor. Every display in every dock. Every holographic advertisement. Every personal device connected to the station network. Thousands of screens, millions of pixels, all showing the same thing. Manifest 771 shell corporations, payment trails, weapon shipments disguised as medical equipment, 20 years of evidence compiled by a dead man who loved his daughter enough to die for the truth. And at the center of it all, a name, Lyra Aevyn. Dock workers stopped loading containers. They stared at the screens mounted above the cargo bays. Merchants paused in mid-transaction. Station security officers read the data scrolling across their wrist terminals. And their faces changed. Not shock exactly. Recognition. The slow dawning expression of people who had suspected something was wrong and were now watching that suspicion become fact. The guards in the corridor stopped. They looked at each other, then at their weapons, then at their wrist terminals, where the same evidence was scrolling, the same name, their employer's name, attached to weapons trafficking, war profiteering, the funding of conflicts that had killed millions across a dozen worlds. One guard, young. Lyra recognized him. He'd been stationed at the family residence when she was a teenager. He'd always saluted her, always smiled. He looked at the evidence on his screen, then at Lyra, then at the weapon in his hands, and lowered it, slowly, like setting down something that had suddenly become too heavy to hold. The others followed, not because Lyra had disarmed them, because the truth had. In truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't need weapons, doesn't need violence, doesn't need an army or a legend or a ghost. It just needs someone stubborn enough to let it out of the room. Lyra Aevyn arrived 11 minutes later. Not via hologram, not via transmission, in person. He walked through the archive corridor, past his own guards, past the unconscious bodies of the first wave, past the dissipating steam, past every piece of his carefully constructed empire that was currently broadcasting his crimes to the galaxy. He looked, Lyra thought, smaller than she remembered. Not physically. He was still tall, still silver-robed, still carrying himself with the practiced elegance of a man who had controlled rooms for decades. But something had diminished. The performance had stopped. And without it, without the gentle smile, without the soft voice, without the carefully rehearsed warmth, he was just a man, standing in a corridor, surrounded by the consequences of his choices. Lyra, uncle, you've made a terrible mistake. Lyra looked at the screens around them, everyone still displaying the evidence. I don't think I have. Lyra's gaze moved to Cade, standing beside Lyra. Old coat, old weapon, bruised jaw, red knuckles. The cheapest bodyguard in the galaxy. The one who hadn't left when his contract expired. You're still here, Lyra said. To Cade. Cade said nothing. Your contract ended. Yes. Then why? Because a contract tells me when to stop working. It doesn't tell me when to stop caring. Sorath stared at him, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, not the kind the veteran had shown, not reverence or gratitude. Understanding. I know who you are, Sorath said. The corridor went quiet. Every guard, every investigator, every screen still silently broadcasting the evidence. Everything stopped. You're the man from Kethara, the one they built the monument for. The ghost. Cade's blue-gray eyes held steady. No reaction, no flinch. Sorath continued, and his voice was different now, stripped, raw. The polished diplomat was gone. The silver-robed patriarch was gone. What remained was a man standing in the ruins of his own deception. 312 soldiers died at that gate. Your soldiers, and the weapons that killed them, passed through my network, my ships, my manifests, my name. He looked at Cade. I know what they were called. I looked it up. After, years after, when I couldn't sleep, when the numbers stopped being numbers and started being people. I looked up the names, Mason, Torres, all of them. Lyra stared at her uncle. She had never heard him speak like this, without performance, without calculation, like a confession. Cade watched him, and Lyra waited, for anger, for the moment the wall broke, for the violence she had seen him capable of, the speed, the precision, the terrible efficiency that could dismantle 6 armed guards in seconds. But Cade was still. I know, he said. 2 words, quiet, like stones dropped into deep water. Sorath blinked. You know, I've known for years. Then House Sorath's voice cracked. Something broke in it. How can you stand there, next to my niece, protecting her after what I did to your people? Cade looked at him, and Lyra saw it. The thing she had been trying to name since the market floor. Since the moment Cade Morrow knelt beside a wounded assassin and pressed a bandage against the wound of a man who had tried to kill him. It wasn't forgiveness. Forgiveness was too simple, too clean. It was choice. The deliberate, painful, daily choice to not become the thing that hurt you. Because 312 people didn't die, so I could become someone like you. The sentence landed in the corridor like a bell and kept ringing. Sorath's face changed. Not anger, not defiance. Something beneath both of those. Something that lived in the basement of a man who had spent 20 years building walls over the truth. Exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've been carrying something so heavy for so long that putting it down feels impossible. Not because you can't, because you've forgotten how. Your father knew, he said. To Lyra. But quieter now, deflated. For 11 years, Lyra said. Not 20, 11. And he spent every one of those years building the case you're looking at right now. Sorath's jaw tightened. I wasn't silent, Lyra continued. He was careful. He was trying to stop you without destroying everything else. The employees, the families, the colonies that depend on our fleet. She stepped closer to her uncle. He was trying to save you too. Sorath's eyes glistened. Not tears, the edge of them. The membrane. The last barrier between control and collapse. You don't know what it was like, he whispered. Building something, watching it grow, and then discovering the only way to keep it alive was to feed it something terrible. Lyra looked at him, and for one strange moment, she didn't see a villain. She saw a man who had made a terrible choice 20 years ago, and then made the same choice every day after, because each day made it harder to stop, because the weight of what he'd done grew heavier with every shipment, every payment, every weapon, until the only way to live with it was to pretend it wasn't happening. She understood. She didn't forgive. Understanding and forgiveness were different things, but she understood. You could have stopped. Sorath looked at her. And you can stop now. A long silence. The guard stood in the corridor, weapons lowered, every screen on the station still displaying the evidence. Somewhere, coalition authorities were already receiving the broadcast. Somewhere, ships were being dispatched. It was over. Sorath knew it. Lyra knew it. Cade knew it, and slowly, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried for 2 decades. Sorath closed his eyes. Your father would be proud of you. Lyra's markings brightened. He would be sad about you. Sorath opened his eyes. Yes, he would. Coalition security arrived 14 minutes later. Sorath didn't resist, didn't run, didn't fight. He straightened his silver robes, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the officers with the same measured pace he had used to walk into boardrooms and diplomatic functions for 30 years. Even at the end, he carried himself like a man who understood that how you leave a room matters. He stopped beside Lyra as he passed. The corridor was quiet, just the two of them, uncle and niece, the last of the Aevyn line standing face to face in a corridor that smelled of steam and the aftermath of something broken. I'm sorry. 2 words, the same 2 words Cade had said in the Wayward's engine compartment when she told him about her father. Except these 2 words carried 20 years of weight, 20 years of choices, 20 years of looking in the mirror and deciding to pretend that the face looking back wasn't a stranger. Lyra looked at him, at the man who had taught her to read when she was 4, who had carried her on his shoulders through the trade markets of Antara when she was small, who had signed orders that armed both sides of a war. She didn't say, I forgive you, because she didn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She said something harder. I'll make sure the name still means something. Sorath's eyes closed. Brief. When they opened, they were wet. He nodded and walked away. Lyra watched him go and didn't look away until he disappeared through the corridor, flanked by officers, silver robes catching the light one last time, because he was still her uncle, still her blood, still the man who taught her to read trade manifests when she was 12. And because turning away from someone's worst moment was easy, standing witness to it was the harder thing, the braver thing. The station quieted. Not immediately. It took hours. Security teams moved through the corridors. Investigators accessed the archive. Communications officers managed the broadcast fallout. Journalists arrived from 3 systems. Politicians issued statements. Some expressed shock. Some expressed outrage. Some expressed the specific kind of surprise that suggested they had known all along and were now performing their ignorance for cameras. The machinery of accountability ground into motion. Slow, imperfect, grinding, but moving. Lyra handled it, all of it, answered questions, provided access codes, identified shell corporations, guided investigators through the financial structures she had spent her entire education learning to understand. Her father's education. She thought about that, standing in front of coalition investigators, explaining trade routes and payment channels, and the difference between a real manifest and a forgery. Every lesson he taught her, every boring lecture about infrastructure, every late night poring over shipping records that she'd thought were pointless exercises. I had been training her for this, for the moment he couldn't be here, for the day when his daughter would need to stand in a room full of powerful people and tell them the truth. Not with weapons, not with violence, with knowledge. Cade stayed nearby through all of it, not hovering, not guarding, just present, leaning against a wall, arms folded, old coat, watching the corridor out of habit, a habit he might never lose, a habit that had saved her life more than once. At one point, an investigator asked Lyra who her security detail was. She looked at Cade, leaning against the wall, old coat, arms folded, watching the corridor out of habit. He's not my security detail. The investigator frowned. Then what is he? Lyra thought about it. Something more expensive than his price suggests. It was late when the station finally went quiet. Real quiet, not the dangerous kind, the tired kind. The kind that comes after something enormous has happened and everyone needs to breathe. Lyra found Cade at an observation window on the station's upper ring. Below them, the Wayward sat in Dock 12, small, ugly, scarred. She stood beside him. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. 3 days had taught them that some silences were better than words, that standing beside someone after the storm was its own language, its own kind of promise. Below the window, Antara Station hummed with the aftermath of truth. Investigators filed reports. Guards changed shifts. Dock workers resumed loading cargo that would now move through clean manifests. Honest routes. Transparent records. It wasn't perfect. It was never going to be perfect. Corruption doesn't disappear because you expose it. It retreats, adapts, waits, tries again. The fight doesn't end with one broadcast, one arrest, one woman standing at a terminal pressing a button. But it had been named, and naming things, even terrible things, especially terrible things, is the first step toward making them smaller. Lyra looked at the stars. 73 credits, she said. Cade looked at her. Best money I ever spent. A smile. Small. Private. The kind that belongs to the moment it's born in and no other. Where will you go, Lyra asked. Cade's reflection looked back at her from the glass. The ghost in the window. Except. Not a ghost anymore. Something more solid than that. Something that was beginning to remember how to be present tense instead of past. Haven't decided. The Wayward's engine is still broken. I'll fix it. With what you returned your 73 credits. A pause. That was dramatic in hindsight. Lyra almost laughed. Almost. I need a security advisor, she said. Cade looked at her, not at her reflection. At her. The real her. The woman who had walked into an exchange with 81 credits and walked out with a legend she didn't know she'd bought. What the Aevyn Trade Network will need restructuring. New leadership. New oversight. Someone who understands how weapons move through commercial channels. Someone who can make sure it never happens again. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a reason to stop running. The words hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. More honest. Cade was quiet. The pay would be significantly better than 73 credits. How significantly enough to buy a new coat? Cade looked down at the charcoal coat. Old, stained, torn at one cuff, singed at the other. A bruise of machine grease near the pocket. Repaired at least twice. The coat he'd worn through every fight, every escape, every quiet corridor and empty ship hallway, every night spent sleeping outside her door. I like this coat. Lyra smiled. I know. Cade looked at her, and something happened to his face. Something that had been trying to happen for 3 days. Since the exchange floor. Since the market. Since the corridor outside her cabin where they sat on the floor and talked about fear and loss, and the things that keep you up at night. He smiled. Not the dry half-smile he used as armor. Not the brief flash she'd caught once or twice between combat and crisis. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes, that loosens the jaw, that takes years off a face and puts something warm in a space that has been cold for a very long time. It made him look like the 23-year-old who had once asked how many children were in the evacuation line. Before the war took the rest of his youth. Before 312 names became his nightly prayer. And Lyra's markings brightened. All of them. Across her cheeks, her temples, the bridge of her nose, glowing soft pale blue against her skin. Not embarrassment, not anxiety, not fear. Something else entirely. Something that felt like the beginning of something. Cade's wrist terminal buzzed. A message. From the Resolute. Tessa Varn. Heard you broke something again. Ship's still here if you need it. So am I. Cade read it twice, 3 times. Lyra watched his face, the way it moved through something complicated. Surprise, gratitude, resistance, and then, slowly, like ice thawing in spring, acceptance. She's offering help, Lyra said. Yes. Are you going to accept? Cade stared at the message, and Lyra saw the war behind his eyes. 8 years of running, 8 years of solitude, 8 years of convincing himself that he deserved to be alone because 312 people had trusted him and never come home. 8 years of sleeping outside doors, charging nothing, taking the cheapest contracts, wearing the old coat, carrying the obsolete weapon, punishing himself, quietly, relentlessly, in ways that no one would notice because the punishment was invisible. The punishment was the life itself. Accepting help meant accepting that the running was over. That the sentence he had imposed on himself, the cheap contracts, the empty ships, the sleepless nights, the refusal to let anyone close enough to matter, that it could end, that maybe, just maybe, he had earned the right to let it end. Not because he deserved it. He'd never believed that. Not entirely. But because the people he'd saved, the 18,000, the veteran with the mechanical leg, the families who were alive because he'd stayed at the gate, they would want him to. He typed a reply, 2 words, thank you. And for a man who had spent 8 years refusing gratitude, refusing connection, refusing anything that looked like belonging, those 2 words were the bravest thing he'd ever done. The stars turned outside the observation window. Lyra stood beside him. Had been standing there for a while now, not speaking, not needing to. His reflection overlapped with hers in the glass. Old coat and academy-cut traveling cloak. Blue-gray eyes and icy blue ones. Human and Vaori. Guard and noble. 2 people who had found each other at the bottom of a price list. When the galaxy was expensive and hope was cheap. You still haven't told me what you were before the 73 credits, Lyra said. Cade was quiet for a long time, a man who thought he deserved to be forgotten. And now another silence. Longer. Someone remembering how to be found. Lyra's markings glowed. Warm, steady, not betraying her this time. Matching her. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the contract token. 73 credits. Warm metal, scratched and worn. She turned it over in her fingers. I'm keeping this, she said. Cade looked at it, then at her. Why? Because it's the receipt for the best decision I ever made. Cade's smile returned. Quiet. Real. And Lyra placed the token back against her heart, where the data chip had been, where her father's last gift had rested for 3 days. A different kind of gift now, from a different kind of man, but carried in the same place. Close. Somewhere. Across the galaxy. In a military archive that most people would never access. A monument still stood. Stone. Weathered. Carved with 312 names. And at the base, an inscription that the galaxy had read 1,000,000 times. The ghost of Kethera. He held the gate, but the man himself, the real one, not the legend, not the ghost, not the monument, the man who drank black coffee while being hunted, who slept outside doors, who checked ladder rungs, who bandaged the people who tried to kill him, who remembered names instead of numbers, who charged 73 credits because he decided he wasn't worth more. That man was standing beside a woman who had shown him otherwise. Not with speeches, not with medals, not with monuments, with stubbornness, with 81 credits and a data chip, with a fire extinguisher thrown badly in a market fight, with the simple, stubborn, unshakable refusal to let him believe he deserved to disappear. And for the first time in 8 years, Cade Morrow didn't want to. He wanted to stay. And that, for a man who had survived everything worth being afraid of, was the most terrifying thing of all, and the most beautiful. The stars burned outside the window, and 2 people stood in their light, not running anymore, not alone anymore, just together, in the quiet after the storm, where all the best beginnings lay.